Welcome back, America, to you at playing Elton John. They did his farewell concert last night in England. I got to tell you, Governor Chris Christie is a Bruce Springsteen fan. I don't know that he likes Elton John much. Good morning, Governor. What do you say about that?
Love Elton John.
All right, just checking.
Went to see him on the farewell Yellow Brick Road tour. Great show.
Governor, I just had on Vivek Ramaswamy, and he has a question for you. He says that you say we've got to stop looking backwards and being angry about the past. He asked, does that apply 360 to all Republicans, including Donald Trump?
I don't even understand his question. The bottom line is that we can't have a candidate who only looks backwards. And so Vivek, as usual, misunderstands my point and just tries to make it for his own advantage. So
Vivek also told me that he would pardon Julian Assange, Ross Ulbricht, and Edward Snowden. What do you think about that?
Look, I unlike Vivek, I've actually had the pardon power, and I take it very seriously. And I would have to look at every one of those cases individually before making a decision if they made an application. But, again, this is the kind of immature stuff that we get from him, just throwing red meat out there to try to get attention. And so, I don't want to waste the time I have with you on an interview talking about this kind of stuff.
All right. Let me ask you my question now. Josh Kraushaar said last hour that you, Chris Christie, are consolidating the anti-Trump vote in New Hampshire. You've moved up to third place. He expects you're going to continue to move. Is that the practical strategy of the Christie campaign?
The strategy of the Christie campaign is to win every voter I can out there. It's not for any one particular group of voters who are predisposed in one way or the other. Because quite frankly, I think the truth is universal, Hugh. I don't think there's anybody who doesn't respect the truth, doesn't want to be told the truth, and doesn't want to hear the truth. And so this campaign is for the people who think that the truth matters. And I think that's going to be a very, very large number of Republican voters all across this country. Remember, Hugh, we have not even been in this race for 3 weeks, and we're already in third place in New Hampshire, only 4 points behind Ron DeSantis. We've moved up to fourth place in the national NBC poll that came out last week, and it came out yesterday, rather, and we haven't even been in this race for 3 weeks. So,
are you going to make the 40,000 donations, Governor?
Yes, sir.
And what do you want the format of the first two debates are in August and September, and others will follow. What do you want the format to be?
Look, I'd like it to be as free-flowing as it can be so that the candidates get to interact with each other and that it's not a glorified press conference. But guess what, Hugh? No matter what the format is, I'll show up and I'll make my points.
I'm sure you will. Now I want to borrow your prosecutorial experience. If Jack Smith, special counsel, brings another set of charges related to January 6th against Donald Trump, will that complicate the first set of charges? Will they have to be brought in Miami? And what do you think about bifurcating his investigation?
Well, look, I don't have any problem with a bifurcation of an investigation, especially if you don't think that the conduct that's potentially criminal hasn't occurred in the same jurisdiction. And so if, in fact, he's decided to bring the first case in Miami, which I think was the appropriate jurisdictional decision, I don't know how you could bring that case appropriately if there's a January 6th case in Miami. I don't know all the facts, but it doesn't seem like it makes sense. And so I think bifurcating it, if for no other reason from a jurisdictional perspective, probably made sense because it avoids all those jurisdictional motions that would come from the defense that would further delay any potential resolution.
Governor, do you think that Jack Smith is really thinking this through about timing of trials? If he brings a second indictment in a different jurisdiction, isn't a lot of America going to think he's Javert of some sort?
Look, again, I think the way we should make these judgments, Hugh, is based upon what are the underlying facts. If there are facts that are beyond a reasonable doubt that crimes were committed by whoever he's looking at in the January 6th matter, including Donald Trump, then I think he's got a decision to make about whether or not he needs to execute prosecutorial discretion. But in the end, that's a decision every prosecutor has to make in our system about every case. In the end, I don't think that we fix our justice system by continuing misdeeds. And what I mean by that is there's no doubt in my mind that Loretta Lynch and Jim Comey were wrong in not prosecuting Hillary Clinton. I don't think the way you fix the justice system is then to say anybody in a similar circumstance going forward gets a pass. I just don't think that's the way you fix the system by relying upon precedent from people who were so obviously wrong.
So, Governor, what do you think in terms of Hunter Biden and the Department of Justice's explanations here and the whistleblowers that Jason Smith brought before the Ways and Means Committee last week?
Unfortunately, I think there's a lot to look at here, Hugh. First off, it's stunning to me that it took 5 years for a Republican U.S. attorney in Delaware, appointed by Donald Trump, to negotiate a 2-count misdemeanor tax plea and to go to a diversion on the gun crime. If that were the case, that should have been done much, much more quickly. And if I'd been running that office and someone took more than a year to get that squared away, that's a gross failure by the office. And I think that the U.S. Attorney in Delaware has a lot of questions to answer in light of what the whistleblowers have said, but also, Hugh, just in light of how long it's taken to come to this conclusion. I'm not trying to imply that the guy did something unethical, but I don't know what the explanation for it is, and we need to have one.
Governor, a lot of people forget you were a U.S. attorney yourself. Do you think that U.S. Attorney Weiss ought to appear in front of the House Judiciary Committee, the Oversight Committee, and answer questions? Is that inappropriate given his job, or is that appropriate given his job?
Look, I think it depends on what posture he says the investigation is in. And I think he should only answer questions regarding the part of the investigation that's over. Now, look, you have to count on somebody's integrity in this, Hugh, because, a prosecutor can say an investigation is ongoing forever. And so I think that Mr. Weiss has an obligation, given all the information that's out there, to answer questions from Congress. And I think if he can't, he said, because he says there's an ongoing investigation, that he has to set a time frame for when that investigation will be finished.
Good
and
point.
It can't be January of 2025.
Now, Governor, based on what you see, do you believe either the president or Attorney General Merrick Garland are infirm? Because neither of them strike me as in particular command of their jobs.
I certainly think the president is showing and has shown over the course of his entire time in office not being up to the job, not being capable or competent to do aspects of the job. The Attorney General has been so invisible, Hugh, that it's hard for me to really make a fair evaluation, except to say that I think he made a gross error this week in defending broadly the Department of Justice in their conduct of these investigations. Does he really want to warranty the work of Loretta Lynch and Jim Comey? I wouldn't. And I don't think he necessarily wants to warranty the work of Mr. Weiss if, in fact, he's had no involvement in it. So, look, his judgment is questioned by me, no doubt, but he's been such an invisible AG, from my perspective, Hugh, it's hard for me to judge him the way we can judge the president from a physical infirmity perspective.
Let me ask you about the attack underway on the Supreme Court. And it is relentless. It's on Justice Alito, on Justice Thomas, on the idea of expanding the court. We have two big decisions this week, Creative 303 and the Harvard case. One will strike a blow for religious freedom, the other for a race-neutral world. What do you think will happen in those two cases? And what do you think is going on with the dark money attack from the left on the court?
I think your read on both those cases is correct as to what the most likely outcome is to be. And I think, look, the great news is I don't know Justice Thomas well. I've met him a couple of times. I know Sam Alito very well. He was one of my predecessors as U.S. Attorney in New Jersey and was on the Third Circuit Court of Appeals when I became U.S. Attorney and was a regular advisor to me in terms of talking about what his experience running the office was and giving me advice when I asked it on issues of managing the office. Sam Alito will be completely immune to these baseless attacks. I think he is the intellectual center of the court now. I think he has inherited the Scalia mantle, and I think he is unmoved by these type of crass attacks on him. He's got a wonderful wife who is tough and strong and supports him. And I think that Sam Alito will be absolutely unaffected by this, and that's for the benefit of the country, but also who he is in his heart and in his soul.
Tell me something, Governor. What is going on? Do you think they're trying to prepare to pack the court by virtue of these baseless, endless attacks on justices?
Of course they are. And that's why it's so important, Hugh, that we have somebody at the top of the ticket in 2024 who will not only win the presidency, but has shown an ability to be able to lead so that we have a Republican Senate along with maintaining our Republican House. And then the Democrats have no hope of being able to change the law to pack the court. But if we nominate Donald Trump, Hugh, we will have Joe Biden, a Democratic Senate and a Democratic House, and then Katie bar the door, because they will do in the 2 years that they'll have, because they'll so ruin the country, we'll kick them out in 2026. But in the 2 years they have, they will do so much damage that it is unthinkable to folks like you and I. And Donald Trump has proven himself to be a three-time loser. He hasn't won a thing for this party since he got elected in 2016. He lost the House in 2018, the White House and the Senate in 2020, and he lost two more governorships, another Senate seat, and led us to a bare win in the House of Representatives, and we had a president who was in the mid-30s of popularity. He is a three-time loser, and I cannot understand why our party wants to be led by a three-time loser who cares only about himself and not the party or the country. And his speech to faith and freedom this weekend just proved it again.
So, Governor, talk to me a little bit about the trial of Donald Trump. Have you got a guess on the trial date? Are you worried about interlocutory appeals? And do you think Judge Cannon is an appropriate judge to hear this case?
I don't know Judge Cannon well, but I'm going to assume that anyone who has been confirmed by the United States Senate and is a lifetime tenured federal judge will take this case with the seriousness that it deserves and will do a good job. I know she's not been on the bench long, and so this is a obviously historic case for someone of that tenure to take. But I know how these things get assigned, Hugh. It's called the wheel, and whoever's up next, the clerk does not show favor or fear, and whoever's next up on the wheel is the person who gets the case. So I have to assume that's the way Judge Cannon got it. In terms of trial date, I don't fear interlocutory appeal nearly as much as I do some of the concerns about the classified documents and what you're going to have to go through to be able to qualify as counsel to see those documents and clear them with a background check, and whatever the declassification process might be, if it needs to be able to show these documents to a jury. That's the part of it that concerns me the most. And that's why, Hugh, if I were the U.S. attorney prosecuting this case, I think, and I don't know all the facts, but I think I may have just charged the obstruction case and the lying to federal agents case rather than the each document case in order to try to get justice to be as swift as it possibly could.
Well, it seems to me that if CIPA, Classified Information Protection Act, presents problems, they'll narrow it down to the least damaging document that should have been turned over and those other counts and get moving, which brings me to my question. If you were Donald Trump's lawyers, would you advise him to take part in debates?
Sure, I would. The guy's already given a two-part interview to Brett Baer. What the hell is the difference?
Well, because people might follow up more on I think he kind of admitted the obstruction charge, didn't he?
He didn't kind of admit the obstruction charge. He did admit the obstruction charge. Look, what Donald Trump's lawyers were doing during that Brett Baer interview was opening the nearest window and jumping out, because The obstruction case is done. It is done as far as I'm concerned, based upon his own words on that interview with Brett Baer. Not to mention that he's taking credit, as an aside, for pardoning Alice Johnson while at the same time saying that if he were president again, he'd have her subjected to the death penalty. And when confronted with that, he looked like a confused old man. Not understanding
there is an answer
about.
to that, but I don't know that trying to get that out on a debate stage will be particularly effective. So if he skips the debate, should the RNC go forward with him?
Well, of course, Hugh. I mean, look, why don't we all just drop out and give him the nomination? I mean, that conversation is ridiculous. Of course we should go ahead with the debate because he is a flawed man, and Bill Barr said it best. This campaign cannot be a national therapy session for a flawed and disturbed man. And
all right, let me switch to presidential issue.
Hugh, don't interrupt me on that answer. In that Brett Baer interview, it was disturbing to hear some of the answers he gave and how detached from reality they were, including saying he's going to persuade suburban women to vote for him in 2024 by insisting to them he already won in 2020. Republicans need to listen to those answers because they will only get worse, not better, between now and November of 24.
All right. I don't want to interrupt Christie, but I do want to get to some substantive things that do not involve politics, most of all being the events in Russia this weekend. What did you make of that? And what do you make of our intelligence agencies leaking that we knew it was coming? I can't believe our intelligence agencies leaked that.
I was stunned to see that, Hugh. And I think, once again, it's another unforced error by the Biden administration. They're trying to show that they're actually on top of things because they have this incredible inferiority complex because they know the guy at the top isn't up to the job. So they want to make sure that they let people know, oh, don't worry, we were on top of it, even though the guy at the top of the ticket here doesn't look like he's totally with it. I think it was a wrong decision. As far as the substance of Russia, look, I think this is a big problem for Putin. You know that. Whenever a dictator has to cut a deal with someone in order to get them to turn around, and I am sure that there was a large payment of money that went along with a ticket to Belarus for the Wagner Group. It seems to me that shows that what we're doing in Ukraine is the right thing because it is the argument inside Russia over the prosecution of the war that is leading to the weakness of Putin that only happened with American and NATO support of Ukraine and the fight that they're putting to the Russians. And so for people like Donald Trump and Ron DeSantis, who basically want to give away Ukraine to the Russians because in Trump's case, that's what he does because he's a Putin sympathizer. And in DeSantis' case, it's a total misunderstanding of the stakes here and the proxy war that this represents with China. This is all, very interesting developments and supportive of the path that we're taking as a country and should continue to take, in my view, to support Ukraine with the weaponry they need to fight the Russians.
Now, Governor, I've got a column in the Post today arguing that China should be the number one issue in the GOP campaign because they are our existential threat. Do you agree with that? And what did you think of Blinken's trip to China last week?
I do think that China is the single most important international issue that we have to confront, and it infects everything that we're talking about. Whether it's Ukraine, whether it is other relations in Europe, whether it's Asia, India, and everything in the Asian theater that is going to be hugely important to the United States going forward for trade and for strategic decisions. And Boykin's trip was an embarrassment, not only because Boykin looked weak, but also because then he comes home and Biden calls, if you're going to take that approach, then Biden calls the guy a dictator within 12 hours of him returning, and they look like the gang who couldn't shoot straight. Let's pick an approach and use it so that we don't look weak and incompetent. They looked weak and incompetent off the China trip.
Governor, I want to talk about the Uyghurs. It seems to me that the silence during the Blinken trip of the Uyghurs is like the silence about the Jews in the 30s in Germany. And I am astonished that the American foreign policy establishment talks about China without mentioning the Uyghurs. Will they be part of your rhetoric on the campaign trail? Because it is a genocide and people aren't talking about it.
They absolutely will be, Hugh. And let me say this. That's been a large conversation inside our family. I have a son who just graduated from Providence College and did some study while he was in college on the Uyghurs. And he forces that conversation regularly, our son Patrick, inside this house, because he, as a 22-year-old, is so appalled by the Chinese conduct. Well, if a 22-year-old recent graduate of college understands how important this is, someone running for president of the United States should as well. And genocide anywhere in this world is unacceptable to free, God-fearing people. And what the Chinese are doing is disgusting.
All right, two more questions, Governor. I'll let you go. Three, actually. New York Times yesterday had a headline, ahead of New York Pride Parade, worries about LGBTQ rights. I actually don't see any threats to LGBTQ rights. I see an attempt to protect children. What is going on with this? LGBT people are under assault.
I don't see it either, Hugh. And I think that this country, as it almost always turns out to place the rights of all of our citizens in a place where they can be protected, and as long as they're being reasonable. And I think that I don't see it. I think there's been enormous respect given to people in the LGBTQ community, and I don't see what they see. But that's not unusual for the front page of the New York Times to continue to try to create a crisis in that regard. And I don't see it.
Is there a conflation between the issues surrounding children suffering from gender dysphoria and LGBTQ rights? Because I think they're conflating the issues, and they ought not to be conflated.
Well, of course they are, Hugh. And look, and I talked about this last week. I am always concerned about the government getting involved and getting in between parents and their children. And the fact is, if this, we've been talking about education for a lot in the last year or two, and about the fact that parents need to be in the middle of their children's education, and that these choices, when Terry McAuliffe started this whole major national discussion by saying parents had no business being involved in what their children are being taught in the classroom. That, along with the horrible decisions made during COVID regarding how our children would be educated, put forward the very, I think, appropriate discussion about how parents need to be respected and their rights need to be respected on raising their children the way they see fit. I think that applies to this issue as well. And I would not substitute government's judgment in place of any parent's judgment on these issues. That, to me, is the conservative position on this, Hugh. And I think it's wrong for folks to try to inject the government into the middle of it. We need to respect parents' rights in all respects.
Penultimate question, Governor. Matthew McConaughey released a video yesterday. You might put him on your short list for vice president, extolling grants to make school campuses safer. Do you believe in armed police at every campus?
I believe in each campus making a judgment as to how to make their campus safer, right? So I think there are technologies that exist out there right now, Hugh, that can lock down schools and that can make them significantly safer. I have no opposition, though, to a school making the decision that if they need an armed guard in their school, if they believe that's what best protects the children, our priority should be protecting our children from harm when they go to school. And that's why, again, a real conservative thinks these decisions don't need to be made at the federal government, don't need to be made at the state government. They need to be made at the local school board level with the support, appropriate financial support, I think, not only from the local taxpayers, but from state government.
Last question, then there's a statement, Governor. Would you welcome federal legislation on abortion, federal legislation, and if so, of what sort?
Hugh, what I want is what we've been asking for 50 years, which is to return this matter to the states and to let each state and its people make a judgment on this issue. Then and only then if a national consensus is formed based upon what's happened in the 50 states as led by their people, then I would have no problem with the federal government coming in and codifying a national consensus that would need 60 votes in the United States Senate. And so I don't think you can get 60 votes in the Senate until you've gone through the exercise of each state and its people having their say on this issue. I obviously would be out there advocating for a pro-life position with exceptions for rape, incest, and life of the mother. But Hugh, I believe we've been fighting for this for 50 years. I love our federalist system, and let's let the states and the people decide this issue before the federal government tries to come in and Bigfoot it. Because quite frankly, I don't think there is a theory right now that could get 60 votes in the U.S. Senate.
Great answer, Governor. I want to conclude with I don't ever talk to the governor without mentioning Frankie Linder is batting .222 and Andres Jimenez is batting .242, and the Guardians and the Mets have the same loss number. What do you think about the trade, Governor?
I still think it's fine. I love Lindor, and I think he's, this is a guy who posts up, as you know, every day. This guy literally has played, I think he has missed 2 games in the last 2 years. He is a gamer. He's a fighter. And I love Lindor. But it's a bad day to ask you that, Hugh, after the horrific loss we suffered yesterday in Philadelphia. I am in a Mets funk today.
Well, so am I. Guardians blew one yesterday, too. But so you've got 42 losses. The Guardians only have 41. So I just say, a president has to admit their mistakes, Governor. I keep looking at this Lindor-Jimenez trade and thinking, you gotta look back and just say, I wouldn't do that again.
You know what, Hugh? I don't think it's a mistake because the Mets needed a leader on that field. And I don't think Andres Jimenez, as good a player as he is, could have been a leader on that field. Lindor's a leader in that locker room, and even though it's not showing in the win-loss record right now, it did last year when we won 101 games. And I think that Francisco Lindor is the type of personality and player you want on your roster. And the Mets needed one of those at the time they made the trade. So, look, with both our teams playing the way they are, we got more to complain about than the Lindor-Jimenez trade. That's for sure.
Governor, always good to talk to you. Keep coming back. I appreciate a half hour of your time in a busy schedule. Thank you, Governor.
Hugh, thanks for having me on. It's always great talking to you.
All right. Be well.